That was Newsmash. Jenny, am I alone in finding this apparent separation of powers on the actual determination of facts quite bizarre?
Oh, it is absolutely and utterly bizarre. At most decent newspapers, the journalists do that. That's what they're paid for. And it's such... The writing of a story is such a subjective thing, the selection of news, the selection of the focus of the story. You have to do your own research. It's absolutely ridiculous.
But this strikes me as one of those things where internet skills are useful, because you see stories come through the New Zealand Herald, the wire stories come in, things like the antidepressant story, which was completely wrong. There was no one there with the skills to actually look up the original research and actually assess the story.
What news editors and journalists and subs are actually paid for. I mean, that's the other thing that has absolutely shocked me over the past year, the idea of using focus groups to decide what goes into newspapers. I mean, in the old days, like 5 or 10 years ago, the editor was paid to actually have the judgment skills to know what his readers or her readers wanted to read. And if the readers didn't like it, well, you got fired and they got another editor. But you don't use focus groups to determine what goes into the paper. I mean, that is part of the race to the bottom that we're seeing with the Sunday papers at the moment.
Jim, are there new skills you're teaching students for a new age?
They are. I think in the last 6 months alone in New Zealand we've just launched into a whole new era of teaching. I mean, I'm just going to wave this around. It's a Nokia N95. It takes video. It records good, high-quality digital audio. It takes pictures. Every student has one of these. Every job they do, they don't do it off the net. They're out there interviewing people, capturing images, putting it all together in video. You know, if we don't do that, you know, 10 years from now, you know, those people are just not going to have jobs.
But because there is a reasonable possibility that's the way they'll be working in 5 years' time.
Out in the field, they'll be doing that.
Even as staff journalists, they are increasingly going to be asked to blog. David has a blog with NBR.
6 of my students have blogs now, and we have our own live website, which is updated every day. Scoop has taken an interest in us, so I think that's the scary thing. We've still got to teach the basics that you're talking about.
It's not all about technology. You've got to still be able to structure a story, know how to use your contact, work.
But we're still doing that. I mean, this is my job. I don't know about this stuff. I mean, I brought a guy up from Britain who's age 21 to teach this stuff.
Well, let me assure you,
I still teach the basics you're talking about.
Among the polytechs, you are unique, because the others are not doing that.
I think one or two have woken up to the thought they're going to have to do it very soon.
That is what's fundamental. That's what industry wants from students coming out of Polytech. They don't want people who have written 3,000-word essays on some academic subject. And
this is the critical thinking thing.
Yeah, well, that is just such
We must have critical thinking.
I was just thinking...
I can tell you.
I've been thinking, like Richard Preble used to. I was thinking of other people who didn't go to J school. I was thinking of Gordon Campbell, Carol du Chateau. You know, Jim talks a lot about diversity, and I think that's an important marker for the business. But what about the diversity that comes through having what Monty Holcroft, I think, characterised as talented eccentrics in the newsroom? I mean, people who have their own life experience, are not part of the massification of higher education, aren't particularly even middle class. They surely add something
to... Well, David, this is my point about the trade school. My students are aged 17 to 56, and they have a wide background, because I think this is what society's like, surely. We don't want a bunch of people who all look the same, all good at drama and debating, and they all have the same socio-economic background. We do want... So when I'm talking about diversity, I'm not just talking about ethnic diversity, I'm talking about diversity of background and life experience.
Actually, this is an interesting point, the background and life experience, because I certainly felt like I didn't really understand news until I'd actually gone out and done some stuff that wasn't journalism.
Yeah, that is completely true. I mean, most of the ones that come in need to get over themselves. That's the first thing they need to do. And stop thinking they're important and they're God's gift to journalism and everything else. And that's what the polytechs tend to spew out.
Right. G.K. Chesterton, the great English writer Chesterton, once said that he never let education get in the way of his career. And I think there's something to be said for that. I'm not suggesting everyone should...
But there's got to be an advantage in teaching some things like media law, surely.
That is hugely advantageous.
Court. I mean, I spent 5 weeks on court, because every editor wants someone who can go to court. So you still have to do some of that kind of stuff. But I get through the theory very quickly, and they're actually out there doing it, and we're editing their stuff all the time.
Well, that's what, I mean, they need the theory and they need to be able to apply
little
it.
bit.
I mean, when you get them, you hire them, hopefully, you expect them to be able to do the basics and just slot reasonably seamlessly into
Absolutely.
the newsroom, and not to have to tell them what the Companies Act says, or what the Securities Act says, or what they can expect to get from the police.
But I think there is another problem here, is once they leave us, the industry thinks they're perfectly formed and doesn't want to do anything more with them. And you're damn lucky if you can find a mentor like yourself, Jenny. I know you've mentored many people. Now, industry needs to say, all right, this could be take more than a year. We only get them for a year.
If you
It
don't
might be
mentor
3
them,
years.
they quit. They go somewhere else.
We need industry training, surely.
We do need industry training. We need it
Industry
in the newsroom.
mentoring, not actually training in a formal
But
sense.
the philosophy is quite different in other parts of the world, isn't it? Yeah, you look at the way journalists are trained. They're not trained in the US, for example. They are educated as journalists.
They do a
journalism
practical MA
degrees.
later, yes.
Yeah.
At
With
Columbia.
mixed results. I mean, you know, the conceit of American journalism, and you know, I've been involved with American papers for a dozen years, is that journalists are rather like lawyers. They have their codes of ethics, they have their sort of, you know, highly professional, you know, behaviours. And this is
And
good.
yet the end product doesn't always reflect that.
Their news writing's hopeless.
And then you know, we
They couldn't
have...
write a news story.
They're timid.
They're great
They're
long
timid.
form writers, aren't they? But give them a news story.
Sanitised and
I
timid.
mean, it's why the Kiwis and the Australians went so well for Murdoch when he moved into New York. You know.
But just before we wrap up, I wonder whether there's another dimension that we haven't explored there, and that's continuing education, which gets talked about in a lot of other trades. Is there scope? I mean, you look at someone like Matt Nippert from The Listener, who took a scholarship and spent a year at the Columbia School of Journalism, which I think he really advanced him. Is that more relevant now that it's a changing world?
We do it at Fairfax. We have in-house training. I mean, we just had one on investigative journalism, and that is really helpful, I think. And the people who come along, you know, they feel that there's some sort of support for what they're doing that they might not be getting from their individual editors, and they come with fabulous ideas, and hopefully they go away and work
but
on
the
some
problem
of
is
these
they then
ideas.
go back to the newsroom and they're required to churn the stuff out. It's journalism, and no one gives them any feedback unless they screw something up. You know, I believe that the teaching should be, there should be people in each newsroom mentoring these people on a daily basis.
Well, do you know what I think ought to happen as far as the polytechs are concerned? I think that you need people who are fresh from industry. There should be some sort of scheme where people like ourselves go into the polytechs for a couple of years, take leave from our jobs and teach for a couple of years. You'd have to have a head of department to coordinate it, but you could all go in there fresh from industry, teach, then go back to work.
It
And
sounds
new
like a
person-
fine idea, but unfortunately we're not going to be able to discuss it anymore because we have run out of time.
Well, we can't talk about the cost of all this stuff.
Well, we
$6 grand
can.
a year.
$6 a year.
It is
You object to
absolute
that.
daylight robbery for what they
We'll-
get.
We'll conclude on the matter of money because that really is all we have time for this week. We'll continue it in the bar. In the meantime, thank you to our panellists, Jim Tucker, David Cohen and Jenny McManus, and thank you for watching. We'll be back with Media 7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.